What is happening, everybody? I'm the Max, and that clip you just saw was my official entry into the TMS editing challenge. Now, if you don't know who TMS are, they are a filmmaking channel here on YouTube. They're very entertaining. I've been following them for a while, and you should too, if you're into that kind of stuff. And yeah, recently they hosted an editing challenge for the Land Rover Evoque commercial, which I didn't win, so boy am I gonna squeeze some content out of this. So the premise was they give you a whole bunch of footage and you just do your best. You can use your footage, you can do things, and then they pick the winner. And they didn't pick me, but it was a pretty good edit. And I had like one guy on Instagram messaging me saying, hey, can you do a breakdown of your edit? And I was like, I can do a breakdown of my edit. So we're doing the breakdown of my edit. We're going to talk about the choices that I made, why I made the choices, what makes the edit work, what I learned when making my technically first car video I've ever done. I didn't shoot it, but it's my first ever time working with anything car related, so it was quite interesting to explore. And I picked up some of the tips and tricks that I wanted to share in this video. Let's jump into it. And so here we are in DaVinci Resolve, which is the software that I used to edit all of this stuff. Here's the timeline. You can do pretty much everything I'm going to talk about here in Premiere or Final Cut. The orange clips are the Fusion clips. I used Fusion to do text animations and drone to helicopter sort of conversion thing. And I know what you're thinking. Ew, Fusion, ew. And that's a good point. But it's really not that bad, especially if you're not doing anything complicated with it. The more I use it, the more I think that round tripping to After Effects for a lot of the stuff that I normally would is really not that necessary. So, the video starts with this tail light tunnel shot, which was the one thing, the only thing in this video that I knew I wanted to do. I saw the headlight footage and I was like, wouldn't it be cool if we went into the car? Like into it, like right into the, you get it. So that was the thing that I definitely knew I was going to do, and everything else I was just kind of spitballing. The FPV shots, the FPV mountain shots, I got these additionally. I went out and shot some mountains. The reason I did this is because they had FPV shots of like the coastline along with Cam A footage and the Mavic footage, but on the mountain road, which is just this part, they had Mavic, they had Cam A, but they didn't have FPV, and I was like, well, that's a missed opportunity right there. I'm gonna go and fix that. We're gonna talk about this later when we break down the VFX part. So when I approached this, what I thought was, okay, it's a car video, right? What do cars do? They move. So I need it to be dynamic. I need things to be moving. I need to show that the car is, you know, capable of moving, that it's fast, all of the things that you would expect from a car commercial, right? And so the key when editing this was to make it fluid with the way the shots are sequenced and the transitions are applied. So if you watch this section, right, you see the camera making sort of an arc to the right and then pointing back into the left. And then the mountain shot, the camera is going in that same direction. Something like a zoom transition here would have sold this really well, but I feel like it wasn't really a place for a zoom transition, so I didn't do it. Overall, if you're trying to achieve a fluid motion in an edit, you need to watch where your camera is going, because if your camera is going this way and then suddenly you cut and it's going this way and it's spinning around and it's doing all this stuff, unless you have sort of an expectation set for that, it's not really going to work. But then we get into the hard cut. And then we have some transitions. So the first one is a frame blocking transition. It's a simple mask. I found two shots that had sort of matching directions. This one's going left to right and down. This one's going left to right and up, but it was close enough for the mask transition to work. I'm pretty sure this one is also sped up a little bit. Yeah, so pretty much all of the clips were somehow retimed, mostly sped up. This one is 115% speed, and then it sort of slows down a little bit before the transition happens in the Fusion clip. Let's get into the Fusion clip. The transition is really quite simple. It's just the transform. One clip goes bigger, and then it's a hard cut, and then the other clip becomes smaller. here it is. If you've seen Fusion before, this is kind of clear to you. If you haven't seen Fusion, what's happening here is we have our first clip, which has a transform applied to it, which starts at 1 and then it increases into 2x zoom essentially, and then over here we're hard cutting to our media 2, which is the FPV shot, which has a 1x scale applied to it, and then it just scales in a little bit. I didn't really have to scale that much in here because the camera is moving forward and the zoom is simulating a forward motion, so it just works really well together. The actual curves look like this, so one just scales up really quickly and one scales down really quickly, and then it sort of smooths out, and all together with the music it works pretty well. Now this one was interesting because this is a reverse shot. I actually did a time reverse and I slowed it down a little bit. So these are all shot at 60 FPS, so I was able to slow it down quite a bit. I had a 30 FPS timeline because Instagram just works better with 30 FPS. If you're uploading specifically to Instagram and you know you're going to be doing Instagram primarily and you have a footage that you can form to 30 FPS, just do that, because if you upload 24p, Instagram is going to conform it to 30 and is going to do it in the shittiest way possible, and just Instagram is horrible. But yeah, they had 60 FPS footage, which allowed for some creative freedom. So this was a shot of Mitchell or Steven, sorry guys, I don't really differentiate you, getting out of the car, and I was like, no, we're going into the car. And here he sort of hesitated a little bit, so what I did is just cut out the frame, because this was sped up quite a bit, so it was like 2 seconds of the video became just like a frame, and so cutting that frame out right here basically made the movement seamless. And then we have this shot, which we're going to talk about in the visual effects section, because it is a visual effects shot. And the original footage had them walking towards the car for quite a while, and it was a little shaky up and down, and it was shaky in a way that couldn't really be stabilized. Which is sad, because what I wanted to do with this is I wanted to have like a vertigo shot. I wanted to zoom the frame when the camera is moving forward and have it be a vertigo effect. Right. The problem with that is I needed to stabilize the footage because it needed to be sped up, because the whole thing was a couple of seconds and I needed it to be like 2. And because I couldn't really stabilize it with 5 passes of stabilization in After Effects, I was like, okay, what can we do with this? I still want this shot, I like this shot, but we need to make it better. And so I jumped into Fusion and I added a vignette, I added a text, and then I added a fade animation from black. So by the time you figure out what's happening, this shot is gone, and you never really see that, for example, the car is twitching like it's having a seizure. And then that's where the sub drop is happening, and we go into the dynamic parts. Now all I did here really was just stabilize things with standard resolve stabilization. I use similarity. I find this one usually works the best. I use translation for like the panning shots. For the panning shots, translation is really good, and perspective is just it's shit. It's shit. Don't use it. This one was interesting because what I did here, I animated the zoom, the position, and the rotation a little bit to make the whole thing look more dynamic. I'm going to say dynamic a lot in this video, just so you're ready for it. But essentially, this is what the shot looked like. Right, it's just a Mavic tracking the car, and then with some zoom and rotation and position animation, it just looks a little more speedy. Then we have the money shot. I use this one as a thumbnail. This one is also just stabilized. It's not sped up or anything, just stabilized with similarity. Then we have some flash cuts, which is where the music has the epic drum hits in between the bars. So it's like... And here we have some interior shots here, mostly just color grading, not really much editing here. And this one was a very deliberate frame choice because of the 69 on the speedometer. It's nice. It's a little nice Easter egg. I put a 69 in there because I'm so mature. Moving on, we have the drone tracking shot. This one had a little bit of animation going as well. This is what the shot looked like. I'm going to disable colors just to make it faster. We'll talk about color in a bit. So this was the shot. And this was the shot with some zoom and position animation. I wanted to make sure the car was centered, and I wanted to zoom out from the car a little bit. So we're bringing the car into the focus, and then we're revealing some more of the landscape, and then we're cutting into another FPV shot. This is the mountains, because this was in the mountains, and FPV is neat, so this was the shot. Moving on. So let's go over the flash cuts. This one is just a door handle shot. This one is reversed. And also on all of the speed ramps, I have a little bit of a fade, so it's not just a hard speed change. It's a little bit of a... this is mostly just color grading, really. There isn't really much to this. But then we have the cloud shot. So this one is also reversed. So if you look into it, you can see that the range here is spelled backwards, but again, because it's like 3 frames, you're not really going to pay attention to that. And then we have the cloud shot. And how did I do the cloud shot? Cross dissolve. It's really all it is. It's just a cross dissolve from the headlight shot into the speed ramped cloud shot, and then I just cross dissolved it. So I did a little bit of speed ramp here to make it go faster in, and then this one slows down, so it's overall. And there really isn't a technique to it. It's just cross dissolve, and that's what a lot of these effects are, really. They're a lot simpler than they might look. So we have a cloud shot, which is a fusion clip, and what I did here is sort of like a helicopter conversion. I felt like this shot looked really good with how wide it was and how nice and the tracking the car, but it felt a little bit too static. And remember, the theme of this video is to be dynamic. So I did a little bit of a zoom in, and then I added some camera shake. So in here we have a very simple node tree. First we have a transform, which animates over here from just centered. I moved a pivot a little bit to help focus on the car. We needed the car to be in the center of the shot here. We don't want it to be tracking the ground in front of the car. And so when it zooms in, because the pivot point is moved out of the way a little bit, it focuses on the car a little better. So we scale it up to about 1.8, we move the center just a touch, and we have motion blur enabled. Always enable motion blur if you're doing any sort of animation, because it's going to hide all of the imperfections. Moving on, next shot is also a fusion clip, and this one was a Mavic to FPV conversion, if you will. Again, talking about the fluidity of motion, you see the camera going down here, and then the hand is going down here, and it's not exactly, because the camera here is technically moving backwards, but because of the momentum of things, like the car is going down towards the camera here, and then the hand is coming down as well, so it helps with that fluidity of motion. And this shot looked like this. Bit of a speed ramp, and then inside of Fusion, I think it's just really a simple transform animation too. Let's see, yeah, it's just a transform. I'm scaling it down a little bit to create that vertigo effect, because the drone was flying forward. So if you scale it down, it's going to create that little vertigo effect in the background. And then we're doing the rotation to mimic the sort of the FPV dodge a little bit, and then we're moving the center part a little bit so that the car stays in focus once again. One funny thing here that you may have noticed is at the remaining like 3 frames, you can clearly see the black cutout in the footage. And honest to God, I noticed this 5 seconds ago. Like when I was reviewing this countless times, when I upload it, when I was rewatching it all the times, I didn't see it. which shows once again that if you have an imperfection but it lasts for 3 frames, it's fine. We have some exterior, we have the rover, and then we have some more frame blocking transitions. So here, again, simple mask over the edge of the car. The camera is going left to right. I have a shot that's going left to right. And then the next one, the tree comes in. It's a bit of a speed ramp to sell the transition better. And then we have the car coming out of the tree. And because these shots are so similar in the trajectory, like the camera is moving like in like a perfect curve with the speed ramp and with the tree, it almost looks like we're just zooming in on the same shot, and with proper color matching. Color matching is important. It looks like we're zooming in, which is just really neat. I showed it to a friend and she was like, "This is the best part." I was like, what are you talking about? Did you not see all of the VFX stuff? No. Anyway, what helps sell this one is, once again, I animated the transform a little bit, so the shot itself looks like this. So it's quite far away, it's tracking the car. So I wanted to make this again more of a helicopter type shot, so I animated the transform, I zoomed in quite a bit, I changed the rotation, and I was animating the position across the frame to make sure that the car is being kept at the same part of the shot, which is slightly to the left, so that when we hit the speed ramp, it just works better. And I just disabled my color so you don't get the speed ramp. It just works a little better. And then we have some more flash cuts. It's an FPV shot from my road trip. There's a video linked in the thing with my road trip videos, pretty neat. There's some more FPV shots because FPV is cool. We have a car shot, we have a headlight shot. This one I animated the zoom a little bit, what the shot looked like. It was a stationary camera, and I was like, we ain't going with no stationary cameras in the flash cuts, so we zoom in, we animate it, then we have another Land Rover. We're going into the VFX sequence. And then we're going into the headlight shot. And then, oh, I remember with this one. This is just oh no, this is a Land Rover logo. Okay, never mind. Still not important. You know what a Land Rover logo looks like. And then we have TMS, a compass, and we're done. 58 seconds. Nailed it. That's it, pretty much. The edit overall is not that complicated, really. The reason there's so many layers on the timeline is because I prefer stacking things instead of cutting things, because I don't like snapping, and I don't like to disable snapping, and I'm very lazy, so I would rather just put it on top. Let's talk about color. So what I did with color is I found a good hero shot. I think it was this one, actually, which is shot on the Cam A, so the primary camera where most of your stuff is coming from. I came up with the color, I saved this as a LUT, and then I was just applying that over and over and over to the shots. And then before the LUT I had 2 notes. One of them was just to mess around with the DaVinci, with the Blackmagic raw settings and make some base adjustments to the gamma and the lift and the stuff, so make it a little more flat for the LUT to work better. And this one was just an intermediate adjustment which I changed between the shots, and then we have the look, and that's what it was. We go here, same thing. I have the final look applied to the last node. We have a bit of a correction, we have a bit more of a correction. So this one, if I just apply it, it looks good, but kind of a little too bright. So I went here, I lowered the ISO, I think this was at 400. Looks a little better, but not good enough. Lowered the brightness a little more, primo. And that's what it was for most of them. Same here. This one was a bit of a tricky one because the hands looked like this with the look applied to them. So I had to window the hands, and then I had to qualify the hands. So I added a qualifier for just the hands part, and then because I was selecting a bunch of stuff like the trees and the screens and all the stuff I didn't want it to touch, I added some windows. I didn't even have to track it because it's a stationary shot. And then I went into the gamma and I added a whole lot of orange to it, and boom, skin tones. And then I lightened up the dashboard just a little bit, so let me hide the window. It just looked a little dark, so I added a window to the dashboard and brought up some of that dynamic range. For the Mavic, the process was basically the same. I added a color space transform from the D-Log. The guys used a Mavic Pro, which has D-Log, which makes it very easy. You don't need, if you're using Resolve, you don't need any conversion LUTs, any sort of stuff like that, because it has color space transform, which is built in. Free version of Resolve has that too, so you just convert it to Rec 709. It gives you this looking footage, and then you can just fix that up a little bit, make it a little more flat, but not as flat as the log was, because this is what the log looked like with the LUT applied. No bueno. And with the color space transform, primo. And then we have the GoPros. So I used the GoPro Hero 9 for this. The boys used the GoPro Hero, I think 7 was it? But they're basically the same in terms of color grading. I applied the exact same LUT that I used on the Blackmagic and all this stuff, and I just made sure to match the lighting. So in this case, I upped the gamma, I upped the gain, and I upped the lift, and I lowered the contrast just a little bit. So just the LUT looked horrible, and then I added a little bit of everything, and it looked nicer. Once again, we have the look applied, looks kind of like where we're going, but not like it's like going 3 stations past where you actually need to go. So not this one. So we flatten everything, just lower the contrast a lot, lower the gain a lot, bring back the sky, up the gamma just to balance how much we lowered the gain, and then up the lift a little bit to make the shadows not completely black, because the LUT's gonna crush it, because the Blackmagic where this LUT was created essentially has a lot more range than the GoPro. And then just even everything out, and we got a nicely graded color matched GoPro shot. I added the same stuff to the VFX shots because I felt like it didn't look all that well, so I added a little bit of blue, and then I threw in this LUT that I used on like the night footage here and the interior stuff, and it looked good. I liked it. Let's talk about visual effects and then move into the sound design part. Alright, so here we are in After Effects. Let's talk about all of the After Effects stuff that was happening in the video, starting with the cloud sequence. I'm pretty happy with how this one turned out. So the first thing I did was motion track the footage. So I added the camera tracker plugin, I let it run, and it gave me a whole bunch of these 3D points, which I then used to create some reference solids. You see it's tracking nicely to the ground, and I use these as a reference to place my clouds. The cloud footage is just something that I got from just YouTube, and I just stacked a few of them and left them stationary and let the camera just move out of the way. One thing to notice about, one thing I want you to take away from this video, if there's one thing you take away, let it be this: motion track your clouds. If you just found a cloud overlay, especially if it's not like a real cloud, but some of those simulated smoke particles or whatever, it's gonna look fake if you just drop it as an overlay onto your video. Have it be a 3D object, and motion track it. It's gonna look infinitely better. But if you want to take it one step further, there's one thing that very, very few people think about when it comes to clouds, and that is clouds cast shadows. If you've ever been on a plane or if you've flown a drone above the legal altitude in your country, you know what I'm talking about. Clouds have shadows, and this doesn't occur to a lot of people. But if you want to have your clouds look really fucking sick, here's what you do. You take one of your cloud layers, you duplicate it. Let's use this one as an example, or this one. You fill it black, and then you set the transfer mode to soft light, and then you track it to the ground. And if we take our clouds here, so here we have a cloud above, and exactly below it there is a shadow of said cloud. Now here we have the big ass cloud, and here we have some big ass shadows perfectly tracked to the ground, and it's something that you don't really notice unless you look for it, but not having it there make it look that much more fake. With the shadows, it just looks nice and natural, and you don't have that subconscious thing where it's like there's something that's not right here. You know, like if a person watching this is not a visual effects designer, they're not gonna have the lingo to explain what's wrong with the thing they're watching. They're not gonna be like, oh, you violated my spatial expectations. No, it's not gonna happen. They're just gonna feel that the video made them feel a little and this is the I'm talking about in this case. It's tiny details like this that make your visual effects sell a lot better. Okay, let's talk about the vertigo shot, which is my least favorite. So this is the shot where the text was happening. This is what it looks like. And you might be wondering, what in the world is happening here? Why is it so shaky? Why does the car look like it's made of rubber? Why is the sky all over the place? And yes to all of those things. But it had 6 passes of stabilization with both motion tracker and warp stabilizer, and it just didn't do it. It worked fine on a real-time speed, but when I sped the footage up, it just wasn't doing it. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna go with this. I'm going to add a lens flare. I'm going to stabilize it further. This export, I'm gonna stabilize it further in Resolve, and then add all the crap on top of it, so you're not gonna notice that the sky is not stationary. So if you have something that doesn't look good, add a lens flare to it, add motion blur to it, you're set. Okay, now let's talk about the big guns. Let's talk about the tail light shot. This one was, like I said, the one thing that I knew for sure I wanted to do. So this was in my head since the moment I started editing. And this was done using Video Copilot Element 3D, which is a 3D rendering engine inside of After Effects. This can be done with something like a Blender pretty easily, if you know Blender, but I have Element as a tool. I used to be a visual effects artist some years ago, and I have a lot of tools left over from those times. And I know Element, so it made sense for me to go with Element. But this can be done in Blender, this can be done in Cinema 4D. This is really not complicated at all. Let me disable a whole bunch of GPU killing, CPU destroying, RAM consuming stuff. So this is the tunnel that the camera is flying through when it goes into the headlight. And the way this is done is in the scene setup, I just have a whole bunch of stuff that just looks sort of like a tunnel with some illuminated materials. And then I have this thing, which is a beam. I added it into a separate group because of the element's bending features. It needed to be in a separate group so that I could bend it a little bit to look more like the shape of the actual light. And then this one was just a low resolution box that I used for animating because this thing was destroying my 2018 MacBook. It's just I designed the whole thing with the boxes, and then I switched out the models, and then I rendered it out. It took like 4 hours to render. I had to go to sleep to wait for that to happen. But yeah, so the way I actually did this was, so here's the tunnel. This is the point where the animation starts, and it just animates such that it expands. So the center of the replicator is here, the camera is over here, it expands past the camera, and then the camera is also flying forward. Again, for a little bit of that vertigo type effect that you don't really notice, but it's nice to have it there. Not having it there doesn't look as nice. So this right here, this little box is the camera. So you can see it extends past the camera as the camera is flying, and then it extends further, and then the camera dives into the thing, and this is where the lights move a little bit out of the way, because when the camera was diving, the light was sort of spilling all over the place, and it was just looking very ugly. This is where the movement starts happening, where the camera sort of dives through the radiator grid or whatever this ended up being. This is an honest-to-God accident. When the camera was going through, I was just gonna make it sort of dive between the beams, and then it had this grid there, and I was like, wow, this looks really sick. I'm keeping it. And the camera flies through it. We immediately disable element so that we don't waste any resources, so all of these layers are just gone. And then, wow, my resolution is really shit. And then that's it. At this point, we would cut into the second shot, which would happen in Resolve, so that's all that needed to be done in After Effects. So in here, I have built a thing just out of a whole bunch of elements inside of element that makes it sort of look like the engine. This is what it looks like. It's like a bunch of crap machinery stuff with some background abstract looking elements behind it, which helps make the whole thing look more like it has more dimensions to it. So we don't just have a black background, but it's like something is happening there. We're actually inside of the engine. And then we have the Land Rover logo here, which is made using Element's extrusion features. So I got a Land Rover PNG, I drew a whole bunch of masks around it to basically recreate the logo shape, and then I clicked this extrude button, and I changed the color, and that was it. And so this is basically sitting on top of the engine, which you will see in some of the shots. And so here we have a whole lot of flash cuts. For the first shot, we have a forward motion sort of into the engine to continue the transition. This one's going to be really, really slow because my computer is garbaggio. But yeah, this one is a forward moving shot. The second shot is the orbiting shot around the Land Rover logo. This is a good point to explain the lighting. So I have a whole bunch of point lights. Some of them kick in at times, some of them are ever present. This one, for example, only exists here. Let me disable motion blur so that it renders just a little faster. So this is a green looking light that makes the Land Rover logo pop a little better. I also use some illuminated materials in the background there so that it's reflecting and looking all nice. The cool thing about Element is that it does all of this sort of for you under the, like, you don't really need to worry about things being reflective. You just turn the reflection checkbox and you're set. Then this one is the weirdest one. It's like the camera is underneath the entire engine like contraption, and it doesn't really look like anything. It just has black background and it looks like shit. But it's 8 frames, who cares? There's so much motion blur, and you've just seen a whole bunch of cuts of the exterior in Resolve, and this one is happening twice as fast, and you're like, what the fuck is happening? This is so cool. So you're never gonna notice that you have 8 frames of nothing just happening there behind motion blur. And also it was like 4 AM when I was doing this, and I was like, you know what? It's good enough. Then we have some forward moving shot with some orange light into this weird tube looking thing on the inside of the engine. Looks pretty good. And we have another orbit shot, which is zooming in a little bit into the Land Rover logo. And the last one is the top-down Land Rover shot, and this is where the second element layer comes in. So it wasn't rendering until it needed to. When the camera starts moving, then we can start wasting resources on another tunnel. This is a slightly different tunnel. If we go into the scene setup, this one's actually a lot more simplistic than the first one. It has some glossy walls, just a corridor of 4 planes. My camera died again. I'm sorry, you're gonna have to deal with the garbage audio for the rest of it until the outro. And then we have the tunnel looking thing. Again, it's just a bunch of things stacked together, and I flipped some of the materials to be illuminating, and then the camera is just moving through all of them backwards. Motion blur, the default After Effects motion blur, was way too much. Like, you couldn't see what was happening. It was just, this is what it looked like. It was awful. It looked like hyperspace, which is not at all what I was going for. So what I decided to do is I killed the motion blur on this layer, and then I added an adjustment layer with some radial blur in the zoom mode, and then I just added that, and I added a mask around it. This was not blurred. Everything else that's in red was blurred, and it created a much nicer motion blur for the rest of the shot. And we're exiting into the headlight shot, which is a 2-frame cross dissolve. Cross dissolves are the best. And that's the end of the visual effects section. Let's go into sound design because this video is getting ridiculously long. And then I'll leave you to... Now let's get into the sound design because this video is getting ridiculously long, and you probably want to be done with it. Let's go into Logic, which is the tool I use for music production. I make music sometimes, in case you didn't know. But anyway, normally if I'm doing a sound design for a video, I would probably do it in Resolve in the Fairlight tab because it's pretty good for what it is. But if I'm doing like a real deal sound design, then I'm going to go into Logic because it's a tool that I'm more comfortable with doing anything sound related. So let's kill the music and let's listen to the sound design. We have our video dropped in, playing here, and this is what the sound design sounds like without the music. And that's it. The goal with sound design, once again, was to be fluid, which is why you never really hear a hard cut here unless there is a scene where there is no sound design required. So for example, when we're going from the mountain shot into the driving shot, right? You hear the driving sound effect. Fuck off, play it. And then this starts, but you still hear some of the car fading out. And then you hear a car fade in just before we actually cut into the car. And then we have some of the crossfades because different scenes, different cameras need different sounds. This one doesn't need any sound design. This one was kind of annoying because I wanted to line it up perfectly with the sub drop in the music so that it sounds like the door. The door needs to hit exactly when the drop happens, and that's where in the video it cuts to black. It took quite a bit of aligning to get it right, but it sounds nice. And then we have the car starting, and everything continues. This one is pretty nice. This is a trick that's used in EDM production all of the time, which is a reverse reverb effect. So the way you do this, you could do this in any audio software that has reverb. I think Audition by Adobe has it. I'm pretty sure Resolve has a built-in reverb. And what you do is you cut your audio a little bit. You leave just a tiny piece of it like this. And then you add a reverb effect and you bump it up so there's a shit ton of reverb going on. And then it sounds like this. And then you just reverse that. And that gives you a nice fade-in sound. It's used with vocals a lot. Next time you hear like a dance song that has a breakdown and then the vocal starts in the middle of the breakdown, there's probably like a thing before the vocal begins. That was horrible. Sorry about that. But it's a really nice trick to fade things in. The other thing here that I made sure I paid attention to was panning. For example, we have a tree going from right of the frame to the left of the frame. And so we have this audio panning from right to left. Not that noticeable on the Swish, but it's very noticeable on some of the car sounds that I've done. Like here, for example. Where is the sound? This is the sound. So when the car is going left of camera, the audio of the car is panning left. It gives you a bit more of that dimension feel to it. Also applied a similar trick to the drone shots, like this one for example, where the car is driving quite far. So having it just blast engine noise in your face didn't quite sound right, even though it was panning. So once again, the car is far left, so the audio is quite a bit to the left, and then we're panning it closer to the center. But it's a full-on engine sound, which you would never hear from this distance. So I added a little bit of a reverb, which is 0% dry, and what this means is that you don't hear any of the original audio, you only hear what the reverb produces. And then I cut some of the high frequencies from it, which made it sound more like it's in the distance. And there's the metal slice that works really well with the lens flare. And there isn't any impact here because there is an impact in the music, which did it for me. And then in both of the tunnels I have a whole bunch of whooshes. There's like two different whooshes just stuck on top of each other, which sounds good enough. And that's basically the gist of it. You need to be careful with the EQ. So some of the stuff has too many low frequencies and too many high frequencies, which was especially a problem here because the music was low frequency heavy. It was a drum heavy, low sort of octave guitar, all that stuff. So having, for example, a low frequency wind noise wasn't a good idea. So I added an EQ and I cut some of that low frequencies so that instead of sounding like this, it sounds like this. So it's a little less aggressive and it doesn't fight with the music for the space in your speaker and doesn't overcompress and clip and sound disgusting. And that's basically it. That's sound design. Just make sure that everything crossfades, everything is fluid, everything is nice and flowy. And you got yourself a cool sounding sound design. One other thing here that I did with this one is a very popular effect. I've had 2 people ask me on Instagram how to do this, which is good enough for me to answer this question. Which is, hold on, let me kill the music. Which is how to do the interior sound fade or the underwater sound fade. And it's actually very easy. You take your equalizer, whichever one you're using, and then you take your high end and then you bring it down to about 600-700, like under 1,000 hertz, and that's what gives you the underwater / interior effect. That's all there is. And yeah, that's the sound design in a nutshell. Alright, with that said, this video is getting ridiculously long. I mean, look at it, it's daylight. If you made it this far, type airship in the comments so that I know you mean business. I'm gonna leave you there. I hope you learned something today. If you did, assault that subscribe button, do all the things the big YouTubers are telling you to do. That's the end of the video. See ya.